Hello, I'm Emilee Mooney Scott, an environmental partner at Robinson & Cole. Thank you for watching the Release Report, a video series that highlights key features of Connecticut's new Release-Based Cleanup Regulations, or RBCRs, slated to go into effect on March 1st, 2026. This is Episode 8. Today, we will discuss remediation standards. This episode provides an overview of how the remediation standards will change under the RBCRs. Of course, the specific plans for how to achieve a complete remediation project need to be developed with the expertise of a licensed environmental professional, or LEP. Additional details are available in a companion post on the Robinson & Cole Environmental Law Plus blog. As remediation projects are planned and performed, the big question is, how clean is clean enough? Regulations set forth standards for the amount of contamination that can safely be left behind after a remediation project is concluded. For decades, the remediation standards in Connecticut were set by the Remediation Standard Regulations, or RSRs. The RSRs set forth the concentrations of various substances that are permitted to be present in environmental media such as soil and groundwater. These standards vary depending on context. For example, at a site that is limited to industrial or commercial use, soil contamination is permitted at higher levels than would be the case for a site that might be in residential use. This is because soil standards are set based on exposure assumptions, and a child playing in the yard would have greater exposure to soil than an adult at work. Similarly, when a site has groundwater that is used or may be used as drinking water, the standards are more stringent than when the groundwater has already been deemed not suitable for drinking. The RSRs also provide a number of pathways to compliance that serve as alternatives to achieving the numerical standards set forth in the regulations. For example, soil that is contaminated above the standards set forth is permitted to remain in place, subject to a restriction on the land records called an environmental use restriction, or EUR, when it is under a building and therefore protected from human exposure and movement caused by rain. Folks have asked whether and how the RSRs will apply after March 1st, 2026, so let's begin by clarifying. At present, the RSRs reside at Sections 22A 133K1 through 133K3 of the Regulations of Connecticut State Agencies. Just about all of that text, with a few additions we will discuss in a moment, has been copied into the RBCRs. In other words, the text will be deleted from the original RSR sections and replaced with a cross-reference to the RBCRs, where, for the most part, that same text will now reside. So, any kind of remediation project, whether initiated under the RBCRs or the Transfer Act, will be working towards the criteria set forth in the RBCRs, but those are the same criteria that had been previously set forth in the RSRs. Let us now highlight a few additions that are being made to the remediation standards as we transition from the RSRs to the RBCRs. As I mentioned earlier, there are different soil standards for residential use than for commercial or industrial use. The RBCRs add two new categories, managed multifamily and passive recreation. The managed multifamily criteria will be available for parcels with 4 or more dwelling units, provided such dwelling units are managed by an association or a professional property management company. The idea is that such a professional management company can provide rules, like no vegetable gardening, for example, intended to keep people safe from residual soil contamination. The passive recreation criteria apply to sites subject to an environmental use restriction or conservation easement prohibiting any residential use except passive recreation. Currently, recreation is considered to be a residential activity. Therefore, a property traversed by a bike trail would not be eligible for industrial commercial standards because the bike trail would be said to constitute a residential use. Passive recreation is recreation that uses trails or roads for activities such as running, hiking, biking, and horseback riding. Use of specific areas for a sustained period of time, like sports fields and beaches, are not considered passive recreation. Once again, the idea is that these sorts of low-touch activities are less risky than true residential use of a property. The RBCRs also provide a streamlined process for allowing certain impacted soil to remain in place if it is inaccessible under a building or a concrete or asphalt surface. If specified criteria are met, such soil can remain in place provided the property owner maintains the covering in good condition, regularly inspects it, provides reports on its maintenance, and properly manages soil that might be exposed during a maintenance activity. An affidavit explaining the situation must be recorded on the land records, but this is expected to be a simpler process than the process required to secure an environmental use restriction. Now that we have discussed a few changes to the remediation regulations, let's turn to another point of clarification. You may be asking if these new provisions can be used for Transfer Act sites. After March 1st, 2026, the answer is yes. There's been much discussion regarding how Transfer Act sites are not subject to the RBCRs, but that's not quite right. It is true that Transfer Act sites are not subject to the reporting, immediate action, and tiering provisions of the RBCRs. However, Transfer Act sites are subject to the remediation standards of the RBCRs, since the familiar RSRs have been folded into the RBCRs, and all the relevant text now resides within the RBCRs. So, to review, the existing remediation standards, the RSRs, are being deleted from their current sections of the regulations and transported to the RBCRs with only modest changes. In substance, they remain the RSRs we are familiar with. These changes include new categories for managed multifamily and passive recreation, in addition to the familiar commercial, industrial, and residential standards. And even Transfer Act sites will be able to take advantage of these new provisions. Thank you for watching. In our next episode, we will discuss how to document that a remediation project has been completed. I hope you will join us.